Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my round 10 recap of the Tata Steel Masters and Challengers tournament. You see, I'm actually going to start with the Challengers tournament this time, because there were some really awesome stories that happened at Tata Steel Masters, including a little Twitter joking war going on. It seems that Tata Steel Masters, if it will be remembered for anything, will be remembered for all of the chess drama that happened that were not to do with actual chess moves. But I know you're here for the serious chess improvement. And if you are enjoying this video, do make sure to leave a like and definitely subscribe. It's the easiest way to improve your chess. Now, our first game we're going to look at is a game between Arjun Erigaisi against Polina-Shuvalova. Well, actually, we're not really going to look at it so much as just to show you that dc4 is a kind of shortcut that's pretty well known at a grandmaster level just to equalize. White played very directly, going for like take, and d5, but didn't really get that much out of the opening. Black just played very solidly. Somehow white didn't really get that much from the position. Okay, maybe a4 is like a little bit sort of lazy, just stopping b5. But yeah, I think in the rising position, Shuvalova was ultimately able to show that her bishop pair advantage is at least as important as white's central majority. And, ultimately, this position that rose in the game was basically about equal. And I think the players just played very, very well in general. I mean, black will be able to go bishop d6 and castles as it happened in the game, and white can't do that much damage with the knights in the meantime. Apologies for the arrows going a little bit crazy, but anyway. But basically the game ended just a very well-played draw, neither side making any real mistakes, and, even when you're on fire like Erigaisi, I mean, if the opponent plays well, draw as best you can do. Though it is interesting that actually after this round, Carlsen was asked about Arjun, and he said that, well, he believes Arjun will be 2-700 plus very, very soon, which I think is not the boldest prediction in the world, to say the least. And then, yeah, looks forward to seeing him playing in some of the super tournaments in the future. So, yeah, this game pretty balanced, but one that saw Erigaisi keep his lead. Because actually his main challengers, Jumabayev and Nguyen, who are equal in the lead, or equal in second place before, well, Nguyen only drew his game, and actually Jumabayev even lost in this game to Bjerre, and I think this one may be worth just a very quick look. It's not the most exciting game in the challenges. That one's the one I'll be showing next, but let's have a quick look to see how Bjerre was able to neutralize Jumabayev's Catalan system. And Catalan actually has been played in quite a lot of games in this Tata Steel tournament. Probably it's in order to avoid the COVID variation with c5, cd5, cd4, with which black can basically beg for a draw quite successfully if he wants to. You can check out the video how to not lose against d4 if you want to learn how to play this as black. But the move g3 is kind of an anti-COVID variation, as it were. So Bjerre goes for, let's say, the main line of the open Catalan, with the move a6 being, the main trend, as it were. Castles, knight c6. And, okay, white can't go queen a4 to go after the pawn, clearly. But he can try to go after the pawn in other ways. As I've said before, e3 is the main line, as we've looked at in different videos. Knight d2 is an interesting shortcut that actually Narayanan, I believe, recommended in his repertoire on Chessable, where, you sack the pawn, but you end up getting quite a nice lead in development. And Jumabayev's move queen c2 has somewhat similar ideas to knight bd2, where you let go of this pawn, but in return you get a pretty nice lead in development, which should give white sufficient compensation. Rook d1 is play, the queen does have a hidey hole on a7, and black will be able to develop. So knight d2 tries to build up the pressure a little bit more steadily, attack the pawn, when black can't go b5 to defend it because of the pin. So the game went c3, this is a good move by black, b takes c3. Computer says that the move queen g4 is its main recommendation, trying to, hit this pawn, and maybe try to provoke some move like bishop f3, and if they do play bishop f3, you go queen f5, offer a trade of queens, and try to slow up the white initiative that way. But the move queen c5 playing the game is, I think, a reasonably safe alternative. And after rook b1, just bishop b7 was a very practical move, and the arising position after rook b3, which is a little bit curious looking, but I guess you are preparing some ideas, like bishop a3 becomes an idea. Also even knight e4 as well, you can try to, trade off the knight and get the bishop or queen sort of more active. So there are ideas behind rook b3. But Bjerre just went queen f5, and I'm not going to show the full game because I think it's not the most relevant in the world, but it's a very instructive principle known actually since the days of Capablanca, where Capablanca, I believe in one of his books, Chess Fundamentals or Chess Praxis, one of these, he mentioned a point at one way to deal with Gambit very practically is to accept the offered pawn, but then to give the material back in order to catch up in development, to neutralize the opponent's initiative, and ultimately to at least maintain the balance. And that's what we see Black doing here. Maybe King d7 is a more clean equalizer, but Knight d5 also worked in the game where White kind of maybe misplayed the position a little bit. Probably should just play... Well, there are many reasonable moves. I mean, Bishop b7 is quite healthy. I mean, it seems most natural to defend the pawn. But White got a little bit overambitious, and he thought that he could play the move c4 and maybe, try to win a pawn, or at least, unbalance the position in this kind of way. But Black is in time to go castles long. And then White should probably just retreat the rook along the b file and accept that it's just equal, because... Okay, maybe not rook b1, actually, because knight c3 would be kind of annoying. But, rook b3 or rook b2 would be fine. But after rook a7, we see the knight is actually a little bit stuck here. Or I should say the rook is a little bit stuck here because of knight to b4 defending the pawn. Maybe White is a little bit behind in development, right? So after king knight to b3, king knight to c6, rook takes a6, king b7. Yeah, the next move is kind of shocking to me, and I'm not quite sure what Jumabayev missed here. Because I think if you just play simple rook a4, I mean, our first thought was maybe there's some genius idea that Black has to, to win an exchange, but actually it's not the case. Where all you can really do as Black is just to go rook a8, and, you get full compensation for the pawn, because, yeah, you have a lead in development. These pawns are a little bit weak, and, if you do play bishop to b2 as White, apparently you don't even have to, take the pawn immediately, although it would be completely fine as well, but you can even play, g6 and kind of take your time a little bit, because if rook a1, rook a4, you end up somehow just picking up the pawn, because, they can't cover everything at once, true or true. I think if knight d2, you can kind of just keep attacking the pawn in some way. I mean, it should still be an equal position. I mean, it will take time for Black to get the pawn back, but this is the way that White should have played it, and it's very shocking to me, honestly, that he did sack the exchange. I mean, I'm not sure what he missed. Maybe what he missed is after bishop b2, perhaps he was counting on having knight d4 and being able to, get 2 pawns for the exchange. Although, even then, that position is still probably just very, very good for Black. Computing f6 is just winning, but even after bishop f6, I mean, this is still much better for Black. Yeah, you have Irish pawns, but, I'm 25% Irish, so it's okay. And also, more importantly, it's not that easy for White to actually attack those pawns when they aren't on a half-open file, true or true. Whereas Black can very easily, bring the rooks around, and the rook is just clearly outpacing the knight in an open position, right? I'm not going to waste your time showing every move of the game, but Black did go on to win in 57 moves from this point, and I believe that I showed you kind of the critical moment where Jumabayev went for... I mean, I'm not sure if an exchange sack. It just seems very, very unsound and a bit hard to understand why he went for this sequence. But anyway, moving on, there were quite a few drawn games. Dada and Nguyen had a draw, and these are two players actually have a very interesting style of chess, playing, very engaging, a lot of good fighting games. Well, Nguyen has, I think, a score of, I believe, 3 wins and 7 draws in the tournament, whereas Dada showed very great, mental toughness, where he lost a few games early, but he's now come back with 2 wins in the last few rounds, and, something on a kind of respectable score, on -1. So, next up, Van Foreest was a pretty sort of draw, which it looks like it was maybe some interest in the game, but it was just basically one of these arc-angle systems where, White tries to make the argument where the bishop is a bit misplaced on d7 when you've got this structure, but realistically it's not much for White, and Black was able to draw it at the end of the day. Also, game Warmadam against Marc-Andrea Morizzi was another draw where, Warmadam, in order to avoid the castle's dc4 lines, played this interesting idea of Ding Liren from a few years ago of b3. But it ended up being very solid. I mean, Black just went for a Queen's Indian style position where, White was able to get a little pressure, but in the end, Black was able to draw it. So, a decent result for Morizzi, playing against a player 200 points above him on rating. Vogel against Lamy was another game that was, I think, a pretty balanced draw. I haven't really looked at it, but I mean, if you take the early moves, you see Black just playing kind of very trademark way to equalize in a, exchange variation. So knight d7 is kind of a move order you'll sometimes see keeping option of bishop e7 classical QGD, or bishop b4 Rogozin, or even c6 and transposing with Semislav, which is actually what happened in the game. And yeah, I mean, in this sort of structure after take e3, I mean, you basically, you have a exchange QGD, but where white is committed to knight f3. Okay, black is also committed to knight d7, right? But it's kind of a move you normally play. And, with a plan of knight h5, it's just very solid approach where you often are just going to castle on the same side as your opponent, say that, you have a solid position, no real weaknesses. And the engine will often give white a small advantage at first, but it's very hard to really make something tangible out of it. And certainly in the game, it seemed that black was just doing fine, just playing the standard plans like knight b6. Actually, even knight e4 is kind of interesting if you want to be a bit more ambitious and maybe exploit the fact they didn't play bishop d3 yet. But again, went knight b6. I mean, even this sort of standard setup is still very much fine for black. H3. Black played knight fd7, which I don't think is strictly necessary, but maybe you want to avoid the Pillsbury plan with knight e5 and f4, maybe. Because that could be a little bit annoying if you give white the time, practically speaking. But yeah, rising position here is just very solid. I mean, the king is just quite safe on b8. Black can, keep flexible on the king side, while also, if white overcommits, maybe a c5 break can be a way to get counterplay. And ultimately, the game did end in a long-winded draw. White did go f4, and it had a quite unbalanced structure, but somehow the balance of the game was not particularly disturbed by this transformation of the position. I mean, e3 is weak, but you do get some, space in return. So anyway, another game where, keeping it very brief in terms of the coverage, because I want to focus on this very nice game that was played by Ganguly against Zhu Jiner. Actually, I might be misremembering. I think because I remember there was this really brilliant game between Bjerre against Ganguly in round 9. It was like an absolutely brilliant game, but of course this is a round 10 recap, and while it could be interesting to catch up on it, perhaps it would be better for a separate video, so keep your eyes peeled for that, subscribers. Anyway, Ganguly played c4, and yeah, actually I don't think I've looked at this game, so let's see how it went. It was d5. So this is one thing to keep in mind, that if you're a Grunfeld player, and I'm guessing Zhu Jiner is based on the fact she played the Grunfeld as d5, the thing is that you sort of end up in a slightly poor man's version of a Grunfeld, because white hasn't played the move d4 yet, so you're not getting your usual knight c3, c5 pressure on the center, right? And in this case, I mean, a move like g3 even can be quite interesting, trying to pressure the pawn, and, well, Ganguly goes for the move knight f3 to, cover e5. But I think that if you're going to play Grunfeld, I think that probably a better move order is to... Because if you go g6, you run into e4 and it avoids d5, so, transposition kings in is not really what the average Grunfeld player wants, let's put it this way. And that's why you'll often see Grunfeld players playing moves like c5, either here or on the previous move, just saying that if knight f3, d5, you can try to steer the play towards Grunfeld territory. For example, if white were to play d4 now, which is the top line of the engine, then black can just take and go g6, and you can sort of make the point that, white does have moves where you don't play e4, like you could put the pawn on e3, you could maybe go for a bishop f4 setup or something, but realistically, like, it's not really an improved version over the e4 lines. And with standard counterplay, I mean, black will be quite okay here. So that's probably the best way to play it if you want to play Grunfeld. But actually on second thought, I'm not sure if Zhu Jiner did, because she now played this move of e6, which I'm guessing her idea is that she wants to go d4, c5, and try to head into semi-Tarrasch kind of territory. But Ganguly decides not to oblige, and he plays this move e4, which I think kind of punishes the move order a little bit. Because you see, the main point for black in playing c5, if the pawn is on d4 already, is that let's say if white plays d4 and just transpose to a normal semi-Tarrasch that you might get from one d4 move order, for example. Well, the whole reason this works for black is because you can play cd4 and just liquidate some pieces. Obviously, when you have a space disadvantage, you want to trade off the minor pieces in particular, yes or yes. And so after bishop d2, take, I mean, yeah, white has a bit more space, but black can very easily find good squares to remaining queenside pieces. Black doesn't have any real weaknesses, and the attempt to create a password d5 just doesn't really lead anywhere concrete, as I believe a game Duda Vidit from earlier in the Masters showed. So the difference here is that when white plays a move bishop c4, well, bishop c4 is actually the main move here, funnily enough, but the thing is, when you play bishop c4 first, you're kind of playing a move you want to play anyway, right? But they don't have cd4, bishop b4, so you're kind of move ordering them a little bit with this. Like, say if black goes knight c6 and bishop e7, like, you can really see the difference here that, black's pieces are not really on good squares. White can play d5 and, take the central initiative, use the central majority, gain a tempo on the knight, and it just ends up looking like a very poor man's Grunfeld with a bishop on e7 instead of g7. So Zhu Jiner tries to move a6 and tries to play it a little more slowly, as it were. So a4 just stops a b5 counterplay. So a very good prophylactic move by Ganguly. Castles bishop b7, rook to e1, just defend the pawn. Interesting enough, computer actually thinks that you don't actually have to defend the pawn. It's saying that after d4 that, let's say, black goes swapsies on d4 and just takes everything like it's checkers. I mean, in this position, actually bishop e4 is kind of cruising for a bruising. Because after rook e1, I mean, you don't want to play bishop takes because queen takes, you hit the rook, d5 is coming. It's just really, really bad compared to like normal IQP positions. But if bishop d5, you've still got some tactics here, like bishop g5, for example, just hitting the queen and developing with a tempo, right? You know, if queen d7, then knight e5 comes with a tempo, and that increases white's initiative and lead in development, true or true. But if you go queen d6, for example, trying to keep that bishop defended, the problem is white has many nice moves here, like queen b3 is quite tempting. Computer wants to show off with bishop f4, but I like queen f3, b3 even better. You know, just make them kind of take because of the pin. You're ready to go d5 and blow open the center. Black's not in time to castle because, you know, moves like queen c8 are also a threat, right? And I think that white is basically just completely crushing at this stage. Well, in the game, white went rook e1, and okay, it's not quite as dominant, but even so, queen c7, queen e2. Again, not absolutely most precise, but even this is still giving white a very nice advantage with d4. I mean, if black were to take, which is probably the best move, but maybe black was concerned that rook would come to c4 and the queen might prove a little bit misplaced on c7. But still, this was a lesser evil compared to castles, where now after d5, white just had a completely dominant pawn structure, right? You know, take, take. Actually, yeah, this is a good recapture. Keep the bishop bottled in. Bishop d6. And now a very precise move by Ganguly. There are many good moves, but bishop d3 is, I think, the most effective. You know, you could start with queen e4 first, I think would also be quite good. But the point of bishop d3 you're probably wondering is, well, what if they just take the pawn and go, thanks for the freebie? Well, then we bring out the good old Greek gift. Bishop takes h7. It's all pretty standard when they can't put an eye on f6. So take knight to g5 and, you know, king g6. You can even just play queen d3 and just get the bishop back with tempo, right? But if king j, queen h5, I mean, you can see that queen h7, queen h8 mate is threatened, and black has to give up a lot of wood in order to not get mate on the spot. So this is why black can't take the pawn, but after knight d7 and c4 conversely, this is just strategically completely lost for black. I mean, white has a complete hold over to e-file. All of these minor pieces are very passive. After moves like bishop b2 and knight coming to f5, all of the white piece is going to flood in the attack Kasparov style. And black's attempt to try to change the disadvantage with rook a8 just didn't really work in the end. Just take, take. And after knight f8, very nice move by Ganguly in bishop to f5, just completely stopping this bishop from freeing itself from the prison. And, well, black tried b5, but it just didn't really lead anywhere. You know, Ganguly was very alert to the tricks. Seeing that after take, take, you can actually go bishop to d2. Black is not in time to take because, funnily enough, bishop a5 is actually trapping the queen. So we see the value of bishop f5 earlier. But after b4, I mean, black has absolutely zero counterplay. The rooks are completely outpacing the queen. White completely dominates. And white went on to win in 36 moves, this being move 22. And I'm not going to show the full game because there are 4 decisive games from the Tata Steel Masters I do want to get to. But yeah, I want to do a quick recap of the Masters first. And after this round, we can see that now, well, Erigaisi is still in the lead by 2 points. But the difference is that, well, Nguyen is joined in second place by Bjerre, who, as we saw, got to the equal second place by beating Jumabayev with the black pieces. So let's now move on to the Masters, which is probably the main tournament you kind of, you know, watch this video for. But you know what I say, you know, keep the best stuff till the end, because that way you're more likely to watch all the way, yeah? So the game between Karjakin and Carlsen was one that was actually pretty boring, but it was kind of a funny story behind it. I mean, this line with, you know, bishop b5, knight f6, rook e1 is... The thing is with the Berlin is a very reliable opening. It's pretty much impossible for white to get a serious advantage against it. But the one practical disadvantage and why you may not want to play the Berlin, say, against a slightly lower rated player necessarily, at least at a high level, is that this line with knight e5, bishop e7 and bishop f1 is just super safe for white, and it's really not easy, in my experience, for black to play for a winning here without taking a whole lot of risk. Like the line knight f5 that Carlsen plays, sort of the winning attempt where you say, okay, if white goes knight f3, your knight is a little misplaced and white is a little bit better. But you have this kind of imbalance in the position where you can try to outplay the opponent, like bishop d6. You have different moves that can try to bring the knight around and at least keep some tension in the position. But after c3, yeah, it's very hard to really make anything serious of the position as black. The game just went take, d6. I'm not going to waste time analyzing it, but just to show what the Twitter scandal was all about. Basically, after queen f3, Carlsen realized that if you don't repeat moves here with something like knight h4 and knight f5, then you're probably just a tiny bit worse with no real winning chance anyway. So as I mentioned on Facebook, it's good to know when to fight your battles, and this is a battle that probably you don't want to fight as black, just force a draw and move on to the next game. Draw black against 2-7-4 free rate play is not the world's worst result, even when you are the world number one. But the thing is, after this game, actually, Carlsen, Karjakin was, made some tweet where he's, like, trying to defend himself, saying, like, oh, I just took the draw, like, I'm going to stop Carlsen from getting to 2-900, like, because he lose, like, 1.5 points or whatever for drawing in that kind of sense. Or whatever the number is. Maybe it's more like 1.2. But anyway, the point is it kind of was this funny discussion where, like, I think, this other GM then made this comment of, like, I forgot exactly what the wording was, but it was sort of, like, saying, like, why is you, like, trying to defend yourself? I mean, it's not like, you committed some massive sin by agreeing a quick draw of white against world champion. And then Karjakin, tried to defend himself in response to that as well. So it's kind of funny, a little bit random, but yeah, for those of you who like the chess drama, that's your fix the chess drama for this video. And you can always comment below, would you defend yourself on Twitter? You defend your decision on Twitter if you, if you agree to quick draw of the white pieces? Or would you just say, I don't care what other people think? So anyway, let's get on to the next game. The next two games I have here were actually both relatively benign kind of draws. I mean, Giri against Duda. I mean, the opening is kind of funny, like bishop d3 is this sort of move that looks kind of creative if you haven't seen it before, but it's actually a pretty standard idea in the Mykonos system. But black just went bishop d7 and just trade off the pieces, and, white was never really better in this sequence. In fact, if anything, maybe it's even black who is possibly fighting for an advantage due to white's doubled c-pawns. After castles d4, like queen g6 is another nice move where, with every trade of the pieces, the double pawns get weaker and weaker. But at the same time, like, this is not the sort of line where black, where you're going to, like, win, let's say, if white, plays kind of sensibly. And yeah, in the end, the game just ended up being a pretty balanced kind of draw for the most part. So, not a particularly interesting game, but I just want to show this kind of creative bishop d3. I guess find the maneuvers a little bit kind of instructive in terms of seeing how to maneuver the bishops effectively, and also how to engineer favorable piece exchanges. And, well, I think you get it. I don't think it requires a deep explanation, but anyway, you're welcome. Also, if you're hearing this weird sound, it's because I'm, it's asking me to save the game. The game's Shankland-Mamedyarov also ended in a draw, and actually it featured the same line by Shark that he played against Carlsen in the previous round. But instead of going for castles and e3, Shankland played this a3 move, maybe trying to catch Shark out in a different territory. But the rising position was never really better for white. I mean, after b5, b3. It's an interesting idea, actually. Like, cb3 is probably the right way to play, where you just, take the pawn and try to kind of hold on. White definitely has good long-term compensation, because, I mean, it's kind of like a Benko style, where you got a lot of very good play down the queenside files, and the black pawn's a little bit weak, especially c6. Computer says equal, but it's kind of easier to play as white, I guess. But Shankland-Mamedyarov played the move c3 instead, which, yeah, the engine actually doesn't really love. It thinks that white is actually better. In this position, I'm like, obviously you can't go b4 because of the, the pin on the file, as it were. But okay, even here, I mean, this is not, like, gigantically better for white. White is slightly better, but it's not winning by any means. So, I mean, Shankland got a nice advantage, but I guess, yeah, he didn't find the most precise way to follow it up at some point, and that's why the game kind of petered out a little bit to a draw. But I am genuinely curious, just for my own understanding, where it is that maybe white could have improved, because, well, there have been a lot, as I said, a lot of games have been played in the Catalan in this tournament, and so I believe that for those who maybe are inspired to play the Catalan based on some of the games, that this could be instructive to see, well, how do you actually use such advantages as white? Because it's one thing to know the position is better, But it's another thing to kind of see what the best move is and how it follows up, yeah? I mean, for some reason, computer wants to go AB4, but I don't really see how that overly changes the position. I mean, 91 I think is a healthy enough move, but yeah, it might just be one of these positions where it's like, at first the computer says that white is slightly better, but if you play out the lines, it just kind of peters out to not that much of an edge. At least that's kind of my current theory, but let's see how it holds up. So yeah, after knight f4, like ba3. I mean, it does feel to me like white is still a little bit better, but black is also kind of freeing himself. Like, ba3 is opening up the file for the queen. With e5, yeah, you're also kind of opening up the play for the knight and the rook. So that, you know, again, black's piece activity does somewhat compensate for the fact he has two isolated pawns to white's one isolated pawn in a sense. And yeah, maybe this is a point where perhaps like queen c2. I mean, I was thinking maybe queen c2 instead of the move knight d3 in a game, but I'm not sure if it makes that big of a difference in reality. Because, I mean, after knight d3, well, maybe the difference is black can go rook b5 and, you know, maybe pressure the pawn, and maybe queen c2 discourages that a bit, but anyway, black went rook e7, and now I think white does start to get a little more pressure. We had to move knight c3. If you're going to move the knight, I think c5 is more active going to the outpost. Like, I think knight c3 is probably the moment where Shankland lost his advantage, probably. Whereas some other move like, yeah, knight c5. Or even a move like rook ca1, kind of preparing knight c3, but then attacking the pawn might be a more flexible move order somehow. I mean, white has a lot of options. Of course, black position is playable, but white has something here for sure. That's in, you know, some kind of advantage. But after knight c3, I think what Shankland might have underestimated, and by the way, it's a very common type of mistake at all levels of play, that, you know, you move knight c3 and you just forget that the move knight e5 is possible, because the previous move, the queen was covering it, right? So it was an idea. And so it can be easy to forget now mindsided the queen is not covering that diagonal anymore. So game went knight e5, knight e5. There were not many more moves, so I'll just quickly play it to the end. Rook a, ca1. h5, very Karjakin-Mamedyarov style, going for the pawn and mating ideas. So rook a4 covers it from this angle. Queen b6, rook c4. You know, players are playing very sensibly. Rook a to e8. Rook to d1 was played. So both players are putting the rooks on the open files. Queen to e6, trying to get some counterplay here. White plays queen c2, realizing that, you know, queen h3, yeah, you can play it, but I mean, it doesn't really lead anywhere too special. And, okay, the game was agreed drawn at this point. Because the way to deal with knight g4 is you can either go rook h4 and probably, accidentally close the notation. I mean, if you play rook h4 in this position, just as an example, after queen h3, I mean, just queen e6 and... I mean, do you really have a better move than rook c4? I mean, I don't really see it. I mean, it could very easily have a repetition like this anyway. And you can also just play f3 if you want to keep the game going, but, you know, it does slightly loosen the structure. So again, you're not really better with either side here. So yeah, pretty balanced game, but I did find it somewhat theoretically interesting, and that's why I decided to share this idea with you. Because I do think that a3 can be a very decent option against a5 that you might like to add to your repertoire if you do play the Catalan. Now, okay, it's true I maybe spent a bit more time on some of the drawn games than I normally would in this recap, but, you know, I think it's kind of interesting to have a look at it and go a little deeper. But it does mean that for some of these other games, for the wins, I might focus on some of the more critical moments, like not show the full game, but saw the moment where the game really pivoted and went strongly in one player's favour of the 4 decisive games that we will see. So our next game was played between Vidit against Praggnananahaa, and actually this was a very nice game for Pragg, where I'm not going to talk about the opening moves, but one thing that was very nice was that he actually got his first win of the tournament. So, you know, he's not just, you know, getting a lot of very valuable learning experience. It definitely is quite important at a young age, you know, to play these top players early before, you know, before, let's say, it's perhaps a bit late. Because it gives you, a bit of an unfair advantage over maybe some other talents who maybe, you know, don't have the chance players make classical games. But yeah, with this win as black, this is actually the second highest rated win that Praggnananahaa has had. I think the highest one being against Topalov in Gibraltar some years back. But yeah, after d5, you can see it again. Praggnananahaa stuck to his guns and played this c5 line that he also played against Vidit-Rapport earlier in the tournament. If you've been watching my recaps every day, you may recall this game, where Rapport went queen to g3, but Vidit goes queen to f3 instead. Because, I mean, even though Pragg lost that game to Rapport, he was completely crushing out of the opening, so I think it was definitely the right choice to repeat the system. And, you know, after e3, like, one small problem you can see white has in this position, and it's not like white is losing or anything, but you can see that white would love to have a move like knight f3 to kind of challenge that pawn on d4. Of course, doing sort of a legal move as such. But with the knight, like, if you go knight e2, d3 is kind of annoying, yeah? But after castles e5, well, you've got moves like bishop g4, and we see that black is getting some initiative. Of course, the players, I think, had worked this all out with a computer before the game, but anyway, knight e2 was played, and, well, very sharp position. I mean, bishop g4 is one move. In the game, Prague goes for the move d3 instead. Of course, I don't mean to play rook takes d3. This is my mouse, chewing at cheese. But yeah, the idea is that after knight c3, bishop g4, well, there is the pin here, which would win the exchange, except that white has to move rook d3 and can say that, well, if black were to take the queen, white would take on d8. And I mean, in this rising position, like, the bishop and 2 pawns would be a lot better than the exchange, as white can kind of move them in quite a mobile fashion, whereas the d-file's not really leading anywhere for black. At most, it will lead to exchanges. So black goes queen a5. Again, Prague showing very good preparation with his trainer Ramesh. Like, queen b7 is possible, but you're really opening up your king. So practically, it's a very tough decision to make. Queen g3 is a little bit more secure. But it also means that black is only down 1 pawn. And, with this attack down the d-file, has very good compensation. And there were some more moves played. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but just to show the thread of the game, like, both players played pretty reasonably, I think. Because bishop e6 is apparently not quite as good objectively as playing just rook fd8 and just playing down the d-file for more long-term compensation. But bishop e6 is an interesting practical decision, because if you're going to punish this move, you have to play b4 probably in order to do so, to be able to kick the queen away and try and grab the pawn. But then your own king also ends up being very exposed, and practically that's not the easiest position to play when your king is this open in the center. But for the moment, Vidit defends well. He goes king b2. He meets a5 with b5, just making sure that he keeps the queenside closed and under control. Probably here is black should play to move a4 and, like, try to, leave white structure a bit split up so that you can try to attack it with the pieces later. White is a little better, but black definitely has some good practical chances, I think. You never know when, for example, after rook e8 and some trade, there might be some, say, queen e6 you can try to get in and, to be free. Yeah, there are ideas at least. But after bishop f1, this is probably a less precise move order in hindsight, as after queen c4 and rook to c1. The difference is that now a4 looks nasty, but it doesn't actually do all that much in this position. In the game, Vidit played knight b1, which is playable, but I like a more computerish move in this position. Well, mainly because a computer says it, but there is a certain attractiveness to the geometry of queen e7. The idea of queen e7 being the queen b3, yeah, you play the check, but now the queen is defending the pawn, right? And not only that, but you're also stopping rook fd8, so you're covering that with the queen and rook. And if they attack you with rook e8 or rook c8, I mean, you can just go queen b4 and just consolidate by trading the queens, which is a very well-known defensive technique when you are defending, true or true. And I mean, a position like this, I think, is just an extra pawn for white, of course. Got to be slightly careful with the king in the open, but I mean, as long as you don't do something stupid, like, let's say, opening up the a file for the rook for free, I mean, in general, I think black will just be kind of clutching at straws here. But knight b1, yeah, is a little bit more passive in comparison, and that gives black a little more hope with queen b3, rook c8, and, suddenly it's not so clear that that white is so much better. So again, went rook c8, rook c8. Queen f5 is a very precise move by Vidit, saying, well, you can't go rook a c1, curse rook to d8, and now we see the point of white's played it. We stop the king running out of a back rank mate, as it were. So queen c4 is kind of the only move for black kind of retreating. Rook to d4 was played. Computer wants to play some other moves, but I think this is fine. Queen to c7. Maybe queen c1 is a little bit more annoying. Just keep the queen close to king. Try to get some rook c2 counterplay in some lines. Because here, there's a sort of a critical moment where I think white could have actually played rook a4. And I get that it looks scary, to open the king. But if you can take safely and computer says black has no real threat here, I mean, white is just up 2 pawns for nothing. And, you can't even take yet because there's queen takes c8. So this is really a problem. And I'm sort of curious, I guess, what the difference is. Like, if we do have rook a4 in this position, just to give a comparison. Well, okay. Well, it's true. Computer is saying king h8. So you can go rook c2 and, meet rook a8 with knight g8, no back rank mate. Okay, to be fair, this is tough to see that you can sack a second pawn and just play a quiet move. But I suppose it's possible to find if you kind of eliminate all the other options as just not cutting it. But anyway, queen c7 is played, g3 a little bit superfluous because black was not actually threatening to take the pawn yet. And that actually gives black a second chance for queen c1, funnily enough. But black goes b6, and normally speaking, I think that this position should just be much, much better for white. Knight d7 is a good move trying to bring the knight around in some way. White goes rook to e4. Yeah, I like rook d4 better just because you're also attacking the knight, so just fights for the initiative in a much better way. Like, the knight looks nice on c5, but after queen c2, it's kind of like, what are you sort of doing? I'm covering all the squares for the knight with the queen, kind of doing it's kind of like, if you put a bishop there, we'd say the bishop kind of, covers the knight. Here, the queen serves that role, and white is 2 pawns up and will basically consolidate and win, yeah. But here, Vidit, I guess, in time pressure starts to go a little bit astray, and, well, rook e1 maybe is a little bit of a mistake, but perhaps a slightly understandable one, that, he wants to meet knight c5 with rook e7 and, try to, trade off some pieces. Although even this ending is actually not all that bad for black. Like, you're down 2 pawns, but you do have actual, counterplay against the white king in this position with the queen and knight. But g6 as Pragg played is the right move, and after queen f4, queen c5, obviously you want to keep the queens on when the king is exposed, yes or yes. And I mean, maybe Vidit thought that he was still playing for a win in this position, because that might explain why he made a big mistake at this point. Because I think here as white should just play queen rook b4 and kind of accept that you just need to defend. Yeah, black can go queen c1, the knight and queen can try to come in, and, white's not exactly better. But white's not exactly, I think, in danger either. Like, you play queen d1, d4, you trade off the queens, or at least you kick the queen out of the way a little bit. And, yeah, black has full compensation. I think this is not really a question, but at least, you're not, like, in danger of losing the game is, I think, the first priority here. Like, queen c2, and, okay, play goes on from here. With black having good long-term compensation with the piece activity. So in the game, white goes queen h6. And, yeah, this is... I think there was some grandmaster, I can't remember if it was Satovsky or another one. I think it might have been some Russian GM on Facebook who said that this was like a very weird sort of mistake. And yeah, I guess, I have a feeling that Vidit maybe initially thought he could play rook h4 and try to give checkmate like this. Because at first glance that does look a little bit scary actually, but the point is, yeah, you just go queen e5 and, I don't know, maybe he missed something like king a2, rook c2, or maybe he missed... Oops, I bit my tongue there, that really hurt. Or maybe it's after rook d4, rook c2 that you just don't have a good defense to queen e6 and queen a2 mate. Which really shows you the problem of the king being more exposed, that in these kind of positions where you have mainly the major pieces, queen and rooks left on the board, well then the king's safety is a more important factor than the number of pawns left on the board. Because, I mean, you can't really easily take those pawns with you to the grave, right? It's kind of not really the point. So white goes a4 instead, but now white has sort of lost its grip on the position. Later on, Praggnananahaa actually kind of misplayed it a little bit and actually could have, I think, potentially endangered the win at some stage. But, yeah, somehow he was still able to win it. I mean, I guess, in this position, this was probably the key moment where, like, instead of rook d8, which is maybe a little bit too general, I think probably should just go rook a8 and, just kind of use this this pin on the pawn. I guess one important point, to be fair, is after king b2 that, well, okay, I guess if you play knight a4 like already, this is kind of a lot better than what happened in the game. When, actually Vidit was kind of close to escaping, but then somehow Pragg was able to win the game anyway. But yeah, just rook a8, just, either take a4, or if they let you keep the pin, go b5, that would leave the white king way too exposed. By the way, knight a3 doesn't actually stop b5, it turns out. You can just play it anyway, because, a b5, rook takes a3. Or knight takes b5, queen takes b5, and again, the pin allows you to win a piece, right? So yeah, rook d8, I mean, I'm not going to show the full game because I just feel it'll be way too long, but this was how Pragg was able to basically go from having, good compensation, then Vidit was winning but misplayed it, then Vidit blundered and Pragg was winning, and then Pragg misplayed it and Vidit was able to survive, but he made some mistakes and ended up losing, is kind of the summary of this very turbulent sort of game. Because one thing, like, the Indian players have a very good feel for the initiative. This is one thing that is a natural strength of theirs as such. But I guess, yeah, it was a very complex position, and they were definitely... The decisions look easy when you turn the engine on, but it's always different when you play the game, true or true. So the next thing I want to share is one between Caruana and Rapport, and this one I'm again going to keep relatively brief. Though it is kind of fine, it actually featured the same opening as the Giri-Duda game with the Mykonos, where in that game, Giri and Duda played d5, e5, d4, and this is how they got to the position that they that I showed you before, with knight f3 and c5, where black says, okay, white has a bit of a lead in development and central play, but, white also has double pawns, his structure is less flexible. Indians will generally give white a small advantage after d4, but I guess that, Duda probably had some ideas like h6, knight c6 to show that the position is maybe not as bad as the computer initially claims. In any case, instead Rapport plays the move c5, which is the main alternative. On the one hand, you give white e5, and you do lose some time moving the knight back and forth. But you also make a kind of reasonable argument that this pawn is a little bit overextended. The normal line, by the way, is just to go knight f3, knight c6, d4, where you basically sacrifice this e-pawn, but on the other hand, you get very good play on the dark squares with knight db5. And I mean, it's one of these positions where at first the engines will say white's a little bit better, that you have more enough compensation. But subsequently, there have been much deeper analyses done of these positions where it's been found that, if you play f6 and, play like bishop e3, a6, and kind of just, recycle the bishop for the knight, I mean, the position is not, like, that big of an edge. Like, if you play it correctly and kick the queen out, like, you can maintain the balance here with correct play. And, top players obviously know this. So, therefore, in order to try to set more problems, Caruana played the move d4, which is a little bit less explored by comparison, but not necessarily an inferior move. So, take, knight to c6 is played. White plays queen to f4, getting the queen out of the way, and, after d6 and knight f3, we essentially are heading towards the sort of queenside majority structure, where after a later exchange of these pawns, white will try to argue that his queenside majority is more important than black's central majority, and of course this structure can arise quite a lot in positions such as, Alapin Sicilian, Tarrasch French, and quite a few others, in fact. Actually, I do think you could maybe argue that ed6 might be a little bit of a tiny concession here, because you are helping black develop the piece for free with a recapture, right? Whereas if you play bishop e2, I mean, if they take, at least your knight gets to a more active square with the recapture, it does actually allow us to see the idea of knight h6, because you might have wondered why the knight was going to the edge of the board. Well, it does mean that, for example, you could take and go bishop d6 without allowing queen f7 mate. So that is one point of the move, even if white probably is still a little better. In this kind of ending, I mean, black can probably hold, but, after the trade of the pieces like rook c1, king d8, I mean, black is relatively solid with no major weaknesses, so it's only really quite a small pull for white. But maybe the better move for black is just knight f5. I sense that probably this is what Rapport intended, trying to maybe prepare the take and bishop d6 and to play that kind of structure. But okay, at least now you can sort of play ed6 and know that at least you provoked knight f5 before you made the exchange. Anyway, the game went ed6, those points I mentioned are more kind of opening fury points, but yeah, the game just ended up being very healthy for black. Queen g5 slightly curious, but I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the move per se. Black decided to go queen g5. I mean, I would just castle and keep the tension, but I think that this is also playable. Take bishop g5, and yeah, black goes for this move f5, which is a little bit weird looking in some ways. I mean, I get that he wants to go knight f7, and maybe it's not as bad a move as it looks, but I do think that knight f5 and, bring knight close to the center just strikes me as more natural. You can always kick the bishop wave f6, right? But f5 was played. Maybe knight b5 is one attempt to try to go after the bishop and exploit some of those dark square weaknesses. But in the game, white just castles. By the way, if white does play a move like bishop takes h6 here, for example, I mean, yeah, you can transform the position and say, that the double pawns are a bit weak. But I think that black's bishop pair fully compensates. F2 is under fire. And after rook d2, king e7, I don't really see any reason for black to be worse. Black gets counterplay potentially on the g file. You can play like, I don't know, b6, bishop b7, rook d8. In general, I think black should be doing okay here. So, in any case, knight e5 was white's sort of tricky attempt. He wanted to obviously lure the knight out of the way to go rook d8 and pick up the exchange with the skewer. But of course, knight f7 deals with that and kind of makes it a little bit of a cold fish. So, take, bishop to e3. And yeah, the rising structure, I mean, it's equal, but it's not necessarily drawish, because you do have this clear imbalance, where both sides have these isolated pawns, and you have this imbalance between, let's say, the f pawn and the b pawn. So definitely a structure where the better player is going to win, and in this game, the better player was Rapport. Because after bishop e2, g5, so just wanting to grab some space, computer wants to start with h5 or e5, but I don't think the difference is going to be that big. I mean, after g5, I mean, yeah, maybe the point is white could try h4, but after g4 you are, putting the pawns on the, on these squares that do constrict the white bishop a little bit. That's sort of the whole point of the play. White goes knight a4, trying to go for the c5 outpost. In turn, black plays a move h5. And then after knight c5, again, probably h4 is a better move, trying to at least fix these pawns on the light squares to make the light squared bishop bad. But knight c5 was played h4, and well, we see that both knights kind of get a good outpost, right? Knight e5, and the knight here is definitely not worse than knight on c5 at the very least. But here's where Caruana made a very unfortunate oversight, as I accidentally skip ahead a million moves in the position. And it was an oversight that basically just costs him the game. Now, in these sort of positions, you don't really want to play g takes f5, because after e5, you're just giving black the e6 square for the bishop for free. You kind of make black's structure more mobile, and that would give black an advantage. I would just keep the tension with rook hg1, saying that, well, if you were to play fg4, you are sacking a pawn, but on the other hand, you also, you have some clear weaknesses in the structure, right? And as the position opens up, well, white is definitely getting some active play with the pieces, and I think that in this position, like rook d3, knight d5, I think white has absolutely full compensation, because these pieces are all not really in the game, and, okay, the queens are off, so it's not like black is getting mated or anything. But white has got some initiative, and black does have to be a tiny bit careful to maintain the balance. Of course, black is also not forced to play f takes g4. He could also just, play a move like rook g8, keep the tension, and then definitely all three results are still possible. But instead, white plays rook d4, trying to defend the pawn a bit more actively, I suppose. But yeah, it sounds like it's just best to try to get the worst placed piece into play. And here, I mean, actually, even on a strategic level, rook d4 looks kind of weird, but the tactical problem is just knight takes g4, and because the rook is on d4, not g1, black has a very important intermezzo. And by the way, intermediate moves are an important calculation technique according to Jakob Ogard's book on GM preparation, and so the move e5 is the clincher. After rook d2, fg4, black was just up a pawn basically for nothing. Yeah, it's a double pawn, but you're also, activating your bishop as well, saying your bishop is better than the knight, so it's a position where I think white is basically lost, and the rest of the game was pretty one-sided. Black went on to win on by move 42, and I don't really feel like I need to waste your time going for every move of the game to show how black won. You can take my word for it. We have two more games left that we can have a look at, and I guess this one between Esipenko and Van Foreest I will be relatively concise in showing, because kind of the interesting moment to my mind happened on move 18 of this game. I mean, it's not the sort of move where the computer will say that it's losing, but I just felt it was a very impractical and maybe a bit too creative decision by Van Foreest in retrospect. So the game went d3, bishop c5, and this knight c3 is kind of a little... It's funny, right? Because knight c3 is a sort of move that might bring back, or hark back to the, the days of schoolboy chess, right? We just go knight c3, castle, I don't know, bishop g5, maybe go h3, a3, and just kind of, like, play this very equal, pianissimo, boring position. But black goes h6, stopping the bishop g5 idea, to which white decides not to go h3 and hope that black will blunder the castle's g4, g5 hack attack, which might get you some quick wins in blitz, by the way, to keep in mind. Then said Esipenko plays the move bishop to e3. The idea being that if black takes, well, you say that there's a slightly improved version of the fe3 structure when black has played h6 is kind of an idea you see in the Italian as well. Well, I can often go like knight h4 to f5, and you can't kick the knight out so easy with g6 because the h6 pawn is on. Now, to be fair, position is still probably equal here, but, it sort of shows the little subtleties that can come up in these seemingly quiet and innocuous positions. Well, Van Foreest decides to play bishop b6, give a bit more tension between the bishops, as it were, saying that if white takes, well, then the rook gets more active with the recapture, and, well, if you have played some Londons, then you're probably familiar with the concept that the double pawns are actually a strength when the rook's pawn is recapturing in doubling the pawns, because you get the open file for free, and pawn moves closer to the center and this kind of thing. So white goes knight d5, trying to at least create a little imbalance in the position. If knight d5, bishop d5, your structure is a little more flexible somehow. You can play c3 and d4 in the middle game in the style of the Canal variation, which is referring to Esteban Canal, the Grandmaster, I believe from Cuba, not, the Venetian canals or something, which I went to visit when I was 6 years old. In any case, the game went knight d5, d6. White played h3, which is a little bit meek, but it's not like a terrible move by any means. I just think that maybe it's more incisive to play, a move like a4, where, you can try to maybe win the bishop, but you also, the point of a4 is that it doesn't allow black to go knight a5 and try to win your bishop pair. Because I think after h3 to move knight a5 would be quite interesting at this point to, you know, trade off this bishop and try to create some imbalance for some winning chances. In the game, Van Foreest decides to do that with bishop e3, take, and then knight to a5. Which, I mean, definitely can be done as well. Actually, after bishop e3, the computer is saying that maybe knight takes e3 is better, but then you are sort of admitting that you didn't get anything out of the opening. So fe3 is at least principled, but I think that after knight a5, black is very, very comfortable. And already I think that, you know, the computer is giving a small advantage for black after take. Bishop to b3 was played in the game. And yeah, I mean, I think it is fair to say that black has some slight pressure because the bishop is a little better than knight in general. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of a question of the dull pawns. Yeah, you have these nice open files for the rooks, but you also don't really have any pawn breaks in a closed position, which can be a little bit of a problem down the line, potentially. I mean, even a move like queen g6 is slightly annoying, you know, going for this pawn, and, you know, if queen d2, you might even play queen g3 if you want to go into an ending, or you could also just, let's say, keep the queen here just to, you know, make it harder for white to castle short comfortably. Because, I mean, white doesn't really want to castle long in these positions, because then a5, a4 just uses the b3 pawn as a hook for an attack on the king, right? So that plan would be a little more nettlesome for white, but instead black just played quietly with castles, and as a result, the position was, I think, pretty close to equal once black decided just to settle for queen to e7 instead of the queen g6 idea I mentioned before. Queen e1 was played, and yeah, I mean, the move f5 that black played, it does give reliable equality, but again, maybe it's better just to, you know, put the pawn on f6 and try to, you know, make some inroads on the queen side. Or even actually a move like c6 and d5 playing in the center would also be quite an interesting way to try to make some progress. But anyway, the game went f5, and position is, yeah, basically just equal. I'm a little bit surprised that Van Foreest didn't play to move bishop takes f5. Like, it doesn't make a big difference, but I think it's more natural to develop a bishop and, you know, maybe prepare e4 in some lines, right? I mean, if he's worried about queen b4, it seems like a one-move attack after c5, so I don't know why he didn't play it, but... And also knight h4, like, is again another shot in the dark after bishop h7, so... Game went rook f queen f5, white did play queen to b4, trying to, you know, hold up the development. c5. Maybe not the most precise, c6 seems a little more solid, but not a terrible move either. Queen e4, bishop e6, knight h4, and this is sort of the moment I want to single out on move 18. Because I think that if black just plays something like rook f1 and just trades, like, let's say, rook e8, because rook f8 might run into knight f6 problems, but I mean, yeah, it might look scary, like maybe knight g6 or queen g6, but it doesn't really lead anywhere. Like, knight g6, you move the queen, it's kind of like, so what? And if queen g6, like, worst case, you can kick the queen away with bishop f7 and just bring the bishop back again. Or you can even just sit on the position move like bishop d7, saying, okay, knight f5, I take, rook f8, and agree a draw. And, like, what else are you going to do here as white to make progress? You can play moves like king h2. Actually, the bishop on d7 and knight is actually hanging now, because there's no queen e8, so actually it's a little bit sneakier than I initially realized. But anyway, black should be, yeah, just totally fine. Indran says 0-0-0. I suspect that maybe Van Foreest was still trying to play for a win, because, I mean, he has been the most decisive player of the tournament so far, if I recall correctly. But yeah, rook g5, like, it's not a losing move per se, but just how are you going to get the rook out of g5? It's now completely dominated by the white pieces, and in the end, black didn't really find a way to resolve this problem. You know, he played a6, but white just kind of built up slowly with moves like e4. Okay, probably king h2 is actually a better move, but he went e4. Black went to move rook d8. Again, probably should go rook f8 and just try to trade some pieces, but black tried to sort of keep the tension in a position, and yeah, sometimes when you play e4, e5, it's black, you just got to know when to kind of sit on the position, except that it'll probably just be a draw, and when you can kind of unbalance and make a push, and I think that Van Foreest probably misjudged this, because yeah, he's sort of like tried to, you know, get some play going on the queen side, but it just wasn't really a very appropriate plan. The end result was that black just kind of created some more weaknesses for white to target, as it were. Go rook a1, b5. I mean, rook f8 is fitting very well with the principle, by the way, that when you have the bishop versus knight, that the side with the knight wants to have only the queen on the board with the knight, because the queen and knight are better than the queen and bishop on average. Whereas the side where the bishop wants to trade the queen to keep the rooks on the board, because rook and knight is better than rook and bishop is better than rook on knight on average by actually quite a decent margin. So that's why rook f8 is a good move by white to trade the rooks. And yeah, after a4, just the structure is just so ugly for black. Like, after c4 is in the game, you know, This pawn is a weakness. These pawns are completely nullifying the bishop on e6, following Capablanca's principle that I mentioned so many times in my videos, of putting your pawns on the same card complex as the opponent's remaining bishop, so as to constrict that bishop's mobility. And the game went on for a very long time. It was 60 moves long, but in the end, White was able to convert his advantage into a win. To cover it would make the video a little bit too long, in my humble opinion, but still, I want to at least give you this sort of teaching point to show that this kind of symmetrical pawn structure doesn't necessarily have to be drawish. Like, even that little bishop versus knight imbalance does give scope to play for a win. And the final game was a very beautiful one that, unfortunately, I probably don't have time to go through it in full. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the early moves very, very quickly, just so you can see how Grandelius did outplay Dubov. So this Dubov-Grandelius was actually marked as the game of the day on chess.com by Dayan Boshkov, so I want to keep it to the end to give you the best till last. So Dubov likes to go bishop b5 often, because like after cut 97, I remember in a New Chess magazine I was reading yesterday, I saw this very nice game he played against Saric in the FIDE Grand Swiss, where he just went bishop d3, kind of played it, in the Lopez style, like a4, and just playing very dynamically. It was a very fun game, one that may even be worth covering in a video at some point, Dubov-Saric. But anyway, perhaps I can put as a note for myself, as a reminder for when I am teaching the, teaching my students the 2000 plus to master in 9 days program. But anyway, bishop d7, knight d7 is kind of the main alternative you see nowadays. Like queen d7, c4 is considered a little bit kind of passive, those sort of Maroczy structures where black is mainly playing for a draw. So knight d7 is a way to keep a little more fight in the position. White goes c3 and tries to extract some value out of delaying the move castles, but by going for a quicker d4. But in reality, it doesn't change all that much. After d4, well, black decides to play c takes d4 and d5, which is quite dramatic to switch to a French kind of structure. To be fair, you could also just go bishop e7 castle, just kind of let white have the space and sort of play around it, with moves like queen c7, play on the queen side, but it would give white a bit of an easier position to play. So cd4 and d5 is definitely the principled kind of move in such a position, and I think probably the most reliable equalizer. We had e5, and yeah, normally I think black is usually playing moves like knight g8, and because if you go knight e4, I think the knight sometimes can be in danger of being trapped in some lines with f3 later. But black goes bishop b4, just happy to trade some pieces, and yeah, on the one hand you are, in a case of bishop d2, just playing the game trading off the, the opponent's quote-unquote bad bishop. But also at the same time, remember that when we have less space, it also means that, we make that space advantage becomes less of an advantage and maybe becomes more of a disadvantage. White can play moves like castles, but the rising position is going to be very equal and a little bit dull. And it's not really in Dubov's style to play this for a boring draw. So he goes long castle and decides to play this way to spice up the game. But it maybe not as the most practical decision, let's say. Because, black does have some ideas on the queen side. A move like a5, even just kind of charging that fawn pawn up on a3 to create weaknesses, I think would be a very appealing idea at this point. But Grandelius decides to instead play with the pieces more, and to be fair, it does work out for him in the game, even though computer thinks it's not quite as precise. Like, it's a very strategic position, right? It's not like you're going to be losing just because you played knight c6 instead of some other move order. Now, White plays to move h4, very thematic in these structures, to try to, go for the pawn idea themselves. And it's all the point, right? Like, when you've got this structure, yeah, you've got the c file, but let's say if both sides just put the rooks on a c file, it just leads to trades. So the actual plan's going to be a little more sophisticated and based more around the piece playing and maneuvering, if that makes sense to you. So the game went queen b6, and after queen to e3 defending the pawn, black played the move rook c8. So again, we see black trying to play more with the pieces. If you want to play just for a draw, you could just castle on, go king b8, but it's not the most fun way to play the position, admittedly. But it does show the creative flair that black can show even in defending. But rook c8, okay, very thematic move, and I guess from even though computer is not a massive fan of this, it's like, he's saying that, okay, if white goes g4, g5, which is the move that white played, well, the argument is that at least you haven't castled into the attack. Your king can sort of try to run this way. And actually, it's one of the suggestions of computer to go king d8 and run with a king. But it's a little bit passive, and you're sort of admitting that white's got a little bit of an initiative. So in that sense, the move queen b5 that Grandelius played, I think is a very decent practical decision, and maybe even the best move, actually. Where you prepare, like, knight b6, and you try to maneuver the knights around to pressure the b2 pawn, as it were. So with rook c1, that's to pin and cover this. But now black is able to castle, realizing that the move g5, it looks scary to go g5, and it is the first line of the computer. But black does have a bailout here in the move knight to b4. The point being that if white does play g takes h6, for example, and just wants to give mates, black can now play a move like knight d3, and suddenly, you are threatening mate as well as the rook here. And that would force black to actually give up, to white, I should say, to give up the exchange with something like knight b3. Rook takes c1 is kind of important to do this with a check, as knight c1 to queen b2 is mate. Rook c1 takes, and this ends up just being 0-0-0. Like, if you play either h takes g7, or even, for that matter, knight takes c1, like, you just end up with this position where white's just going to give some perpetual check, and you can't really get out of it, because this h pawn is just a bit too fast. Say, rook c8. We kind of have to play rook c8, actually, because black does need the counterplay on the queen side, so like h6, and yeah, at this point you need to get something moving, but good news is you've got the move queen f1, and then the move h7 is not winning for white, because you go rook takes c1. This is very important. You have to see this all the way back, but obviously Dubov, or I should say Grandelius, had seen that. After queen e3, either you get back the pawn or just total equality. King a1, queen h7, queen c8, king e7. Or they go queen c2, and yeah, you just repeat moves, and a draw would be a fair result. But Dubov decides, yeah, again, he doesn't want to go for a draw, so rather than playing g5, which, as you can see, it's the engine's first line, but it just comes to equality in the end. White goes a3, trying to stop knight b4, but that's also a concession. Like, it takes a whole tempo to avoid this, and now Grandelius plays a very good prophylactic move, realizing that white's manager is to go g5 and open up the center, or open up the king side for the attack, using h6 pawns or hooks to open files. Black plays a move knight e7. So that if white does play g5, you go knight to f5, you're covering h6, you're hitting the queen. If the queen goes to a bad square, you get a queen d3 penetration, and suddenly, white probably has to go queen b3 and accept, just some equal ending, where, black is not getting mated. Let's put it like this. Structure is definitely not worse for black after h5, knight g5, and so on. So, in the game, white goes knight h4, still trying to, hustle here. But this is where I think maybe Dubov starts to outplay himself a little bit. I mean, to be fair, maybe position is still okay for white, but now knight b6 and suddenly the knight can try to come in. Apparently white should go f4 and try to just get this f5, g5 moving as fast as possible. The prophylactic king a2 just loses a bit too much initiative, and with knight c4 we see that, well, if white plays knight c4, then dc4, and, well, the problem is knight d5 is coming with a tempo. Then after that, you're clearing away for queen b3 or c3 to rip open the king, and it's just really, really bad for white. So white kind of has to make the concession of queen b3, trying to bail out into an endgame. But here the position is like white is so far away from making any kind of meaningful threat on the king side now, without the queen in the action, that you can actually just play queen a6, and now it's black who has a much faster attack. So how cool is that? I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We had knight c6, rook c6. Okay, because the video is actually already over an hour long, what I'm going to do is not show every single move, but I'm just going to fast forward to kind of a key moment that happened much later in the endgame, because I think that's probably the most instructive part of this game of what's left. And so this position ultimately arose where black was up a pawn, and he was trying to queen his pawn like this. And it's a very interesting question, actually, does white have a way to save this position, or is black winning even if he plays the best moves? And that's a question I want to answer here. Now, in the game, Dubov didn't put up the best resistance. He just played knight c2. And after a1 equals queen take, I mean, Dubov pinned his hopes on f5, but it just doesn't come, the counterplay just doesn't come in time. Where after gf5, e5, gf5, black was able to transition to a winning endgame with rook to c1, king to d2. Oh, did I say duo? I meant to say Grandelius. So yeah, knight c7 is apparently the top move to keep the extra piece, but Grandelius decides to go rook f1, saying that, if you take, then black is just going to collect the harvest, and, well, basically up 2 pawns of rook ending, which will be enough to win, by the way. If rook a6, you will be in time to catch the e pawn with rook e5, as it were, and that will keep the win. Or if they go king d3, you have, rook h4, to cut the king off as needed. Because, I mean, if they play, rook d6 or rook a5, for example, I mean, this is a... this position is well known to be a theoretical win. It takes a little technique, but it's not hard for a player of this caliber. But white goes f6, trying to complicate. But yeah, after knight c5, which is kind of an important move to, have knight e4 checks in the mix. rook a7 and, king g8. And, well, basically, Grandelius saying, yeah, you can take the pawn, you've got connected past pawns, but a piece is a piece, and black is also able to go rook f5 to attack these pawns and to mop up, as it were. And after rook c7, knight e6, white's not getting any of these perpetual check ideas, and after rook b7, knight g5, yeah, we can kind of see that in this position, the king is kind of getting out if white were to give a whole lot of checks. Well, he decided to do it this way with, like, rook b8, rook b7, and, after a little shuffle, we had king to e8, and then rook, the king can either go this way to get out of it. Although, actually, probably Grandelius misplayed this, in fact. Like, rook f5 might have actually spoiled the win in this position, as opposed to playing, some moves such as rook e1 and just, king f4, knight e6, which looks incredibly scary at first glance, because, yeah, king f5, and it might seem like your king is suddenly getting mated here. But after king g6, you have this very, very nice move here. Not rook takes e5, because then rook b8, and surprisingly, white is actually getting enough counterplay to draw. But you have this very beautiful knight c6, where you stop rook b8, and you just take the pawn, but on your own terms. After king h6, knight e5, the king is not able to get to g6 to threaten mating ideas, while black is able to keep the pawn alive and basically be winning. But okay, to be fair, this is very, very difficult to see, especially in time trouble. And that might be one reason why, yeah, the computer is saying in this position at knight g5, while it's still winning that knight d4. And kind of playing more for, like, things like, some knight f3 in some lines, or, rook f5, and doing it this way would be a much more efficient way to, pick off the pawns, as it were. Because if black keeps even one pawn alive, he is probably going to just win this game with the extra piece, right? But yeah, here at this stage, like, white kind of misplayed it at some point. Rook e7 is a good move, and now Dubov is actually, in fact, drawing this position if he plays correctly. But after knight f7, king d5, and rook h5, well, we know that Grandelius won, and so white misplayed a key point. King e4 is a good move, trying to clear the way for e6 in some lines. Black goes rook to g5, and yeah, this is the moment where white makes his decisive mistake, or let's say the final decisive mistake. Definitely was an off day for Dubov, we could say. So in this position here, what white should do is he should just keep it relatively simple, in fact. He should play the move of e6. Okay, according to computer, there are other moves that also draw, but e6 is certainly the most direct. Like, if this is working, then there's no real need to calculate the alternatives, in a sense. And after knight d6 now, we don't play king f4, because rook f5 and we lose the pawn. And also king d4 runs into knight f5 forks. But we go king to d3. And after this, there are different checks you can try, but the point is that, it's very hard to kind of just deal with, like, different, even mating or, perpetual check style ideas. And if black plays some move like, I don't know, let's say you play rook e5 to try to stop this whole idea. Well, white just goes rook h7, just, with the mate threat, forces the trade of these pawns, and I mean, rook and knight versus rook is an ironclad draw, yeah? I mean, any player worth their salt can hold this. At least, when your king is not stuck on the corner board, then it's quite easy. You just pin the knight with a king, you give some checks, and, it's pretty simple. But okay, in any case, I don't think if there are any other moves black can try. Like, knight f5 is a move that might look a bit scary. Like, maybe this is what white was worried about, that there'd be some tricks like this. But you go rook h7. I mean, you're threatening rook h8 mate. You're also threatening to kind of push your pawns down the board. So it'll kind of lead to a similar situation where the pawns get hoovered off. And again, this is just a dead draw. But instead of that, white falls for black's final trick. Maybe white fought after king f4. Maybe he thought he was actually playing for a win at this point, thinking that maybe I can even try to, not give up one of my pawns to get rid of this. And so in the end, I guess white's ambition kind of proved his undoing, as black found a very beautiful move of knight to h8, threatening the knight g6 fork with a check. This is why king f4 is such an egregious mistake. And now after king e4, knight g6, we see the difference that rook e6, king f7 would leave white unable to keep that pawn well defended, as it were. Whereas after rook h7, black goes rook e5, and black is just in time to play the move h5, or rook h5 also works, and keep his extra pawn, his one remaining pawn alive. So the game ended rook g7, rook g5, rook h7, knight to e5, rook g7 hoping for some miracle, but after knight f7 it's pretty clear that the rooks will get traded and white has no way to get rid of black's last pawn. Rook h7, king g8 forces the issue, and therefore Dubov resigned. Okay, this was a little bit of a long video, and yeah, certainly had a lot of fun, going through through these games. I think there are a lot of very instructive lessons, and it was fun to experiment with, a slightly different format, where rather than like going through a small number of games in full, I decided to show more the key moments and the key sort of learning points from each of the games, which I believe will help you improve more quickly to pick out the most instructive lesson, the 20% of those games that give you like 80% of the learning, rather than like trying to cover it exhaustively like some, PhD who, is, let's say, like, highly qualified, but still you're only earning paycheck to paycheck. Whereas on YouTube, well, of course, I'm a long way off from this, but the hope is, one day I'll be able to, bring in, the good money, get sponsorship deals, and have, some six figures coming in from YouTube alone. There's still some way from that, but when you do, comment below and let me know what your favorite game is. Every little bit helps me, to be able to help you guys more, and also to reach out to my main audience, who are the players rated 2000 plus, who are serious about getting to that chess master level, which might be either 200 plus for like USCF master or candidate master, or it might mean 300 plus for you if you mean FIDE master, depending on your definition. As I say, your mileage may vary. But if you are rated over 2000 and you're really enjoying these videos, you're finding my style kind of very instructive and useful for you, but you want to take it to the next level and have some very specific direction for your situation and a full plan, rather than, just like these pre-recorded lessons, then do get in touch with me on my Facebook. I'm not going to put the link here because it's going to tank the YouTube engagement, but, you can ask me in the comments like, hey, Max, what is your, link to connect with you personally? And, I'll just answer in the comments and let you guys know. So on that note, well, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this whole video. It shows that you are serious about improving your chess, and I want to congratulate you for that. And I'm going to see you guys in the next one, which will likely be the Tata Steel Round 11 report for tomorrow. At least I'm assuming there's not a rest day tomorrow. I think that, yeah, there's still another game going ahead if I remember correctly. Anyway, guys, I will see you for the next recap. Get out of here.